Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, everybody. Today, inshallah, we're going to read from ayah number 49 onwards of Surah Al-Baqarah. And this is in the context of, in fact, relief. Last time we spoke about the relief that was given in the end to the family of Yaqub alayhi salam. And of course, the family of Yaqub alayhi salam eventually go on after some generations to become the children of Israel. That is the descendants of Yaqub alayhi salam that we're talking about. And they are a big subject in the Quran. They are a focus. This nation is a focus in the Quran because, not for any other reason, but for us to understand that our ummah, the believers, are going to have very similar behaviors to them. We're going to face similar challenges to them. And we're going to have to watch out for their responses. Like Allah did them favors, Allah will do us favors. They have failures, we might have similar failures. Allah is teaching us through their example what failures to avoid and what to learn from and what to see of their behavior in ourselves as a nation. So sometimes in the Quran there is the model of an individual and you look at yourself as an individual and say, how do I measure up to that individual? Other times in the Quran there's the model of a nation and we look at ourselves as a nation and see how is our national behavior, our ummah level behavior, mimicking or mirroring the behavior of other nations that came before us. So the examples of those nations are given so that we can reflect not just as individuals but as a collective. Now, coming to the point for the Israelites, Allah mentions, Ya Bani Israel, adhkuru ni'mati allati an'amtu alaykum. Make mention of the favor that I did to you, children of Israel. So Allah is going to list a number of His favors. Now the problem is, every favor Allah gave them is there in a crisis and Allah brings them out of the crisis. Then they're in a crisis and Allah brings them out of the crisis. And there's two kinds of crisis. There's a crisis that others are putting on them or the situation is bad. Like the Pharaoh is putting them in a crisis, right? So the opening ayah will be, when we rescued you from the clutches of the descendants of the Pharaoh, the dynasty of the Pharaoh. They were humiliating you with the worst kinds of punishment. Su al-adhab, yudhabbihuna abna'akum. They were mass slaughtering your children. وَيَسْتَحْيُونَ نِسَاءَكُمْ. And they were letting your women live, which is, by the way, an indirect way of saying they were violating your women. That's embedded inside يَسْتَحْيُونَ نِسَاءَكُمْ. وَفِي ذَلِكُمْ بَلَاءٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ عَظِيمٌ has dual meaning. It means it was a great test for you, but if you tie وَفِي ذَلِكُمْ بَلَاءٌ with نَجَّيْنَاكُمْ, bala is لغة الأضداد, they say in Arabic. Means bala means fitna, and bala also means ni'mah in Old Arabic. So actually in rescuing you was a great relief from Allah, a great blessing from Allah. And you'll notice all of the ayat will be some kind of relief. You notice the next ayat, إِذْ فَرَقْنَا بِكُمُ الْبَحْرِ, when we parted the water for you. So they're escaping the people of the Pharaoh and his armies. فَأَنْجَيْنَاكُمْ, we rescued you once and for all. وَأَغْرَقْنَا آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ, and we drowned the entire dynasty of the Pharaoh. So we didn't just drown the Pharaoh, we drowned his entire power structure. So now even if the Pharaoh drowned, somebody else might come and take revenge. It's not easy, it's not so hard to cross the water, right? They might come next month, next year. But Allah says, I ended his power structure once and for all. You were safe forever. And you saw that come to an end in front of your eyes. وَأَنْتُمْ تَنْظُرُونَ. Because if you didn't see it with your own eyes, even if you crossed the water, you'd keep looking back. Because they have ships too. And they have other means to get back to you also, right? But Allah wanted you to see that this is a long relief, permanent relief. You had no way of retaliating against the Pharaoh when he was coming at you. All you could do was stare. Allah is the one who drowned him, and your contribution was watching. Like you had nothing else to, and yet Allah took the mightiest army in the world and decimated it in front of your eyes, where the only thing you had the power to do was watch. وَإِذْ وَاعَدْنَا مُوسَى 40 لَيْلَةً. And after that, okay, now Allah has done this enormous favor to you, and Allah calls His Prophet Musa alayhi salam for 40 nights for a meeting, and behind his back you turn back into pagans. ثُمَّ اتَّخَذْتُمُ الْعِجْلَ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ وَأَنْتُمْ ظَالِمُونَ. You messed up big time. Now if you mess up, so I told you there's two kinds of disasters. There's disasters coming from the outside, the enemy, the Pharaoh, the desert, you're dehydrating in the desert. The other kind of disaster is your own mistakes. That's a disaster too. So one disaster will get you in trouble with people, the other disaster will get you in trouble with Allah. And this time you messed up, you're in trouble with Allah. And Allah says, after that, ثُمَّ عَفَوْنَا عَنْكُمْ. Even then we pardoned you. Even after you messed up and you did the ultimate crime. إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَنْ يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah does not forgive that shirk should be committed with Him. He may forgive other things, and He makes an exception and gets you to even accepts your apology for that and lets you go as a nation. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. So this time you may be grateful. Okay, another chance given to them. وَإِذْ آتَيْنَا مُوسَى الْكِتَابَ وَالْفُرْقَانَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَهْتَدُونَ. Another relief is actually the book of Allah. How should we live? What should we live by? And by the way, in Fatiha we learned the ultimate mercy of Allah is His guidance. So it's the ultimate mercy of Allah isn't even that they escaped Egypt or that they were forgiven, but actually the ultimate, the climax of Allah's rahmah on humanity is He will give them instruction and talk to them. Ar-Rahman allama al-Quran, right? The same way when Allah mentions here, because it's a list of favors. And He says, one of Allah's biggest favors is He gave you His book. Al-Kitab wal-Furqan la'allakum tahtadun. وإذ قال موسى لقومه إنكم ظلمتم أنفسكم باتخاذكم العجل فتوبوا إلى بارئكم فاقتلوا أنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم عند بارئكم فتاب عليكم إنه هو التواب الرحيم. Okay, so Musa gave you a way out. You had committed shirk. Musa alayhi salam told you, those of you who committed this crime, they have to be killed. There's a punishment from Allah and the rest of you will be saved. And you turned back instead of obeying the commandment. It's a harsh commandment, but there's a context to it, right? Allah just rescued you from the Pharaoh, showed you all these miracles, showed you the water being parted, and yet you still went back and left the religion. You are punishable, and they would not be punishable if they were not in the presence of a prophet. But in front of a prophet, you still went back into shirk. This has to be made an example out of. And so when they're given this punishment, they turn back and and Allah says, and you do this, and the rest of you will be, you will be excused. And what did they say to Allah, to Musa alayhi salam? لَن نُؤْمِنَ لَكَ حَتَّى نَرَى اللَّهَ جَهْرًا. We're not going to believe until we see Allah face to face. فَأَخَذَتْكُمُ الصَّاعِقَةُ. Now this brought the wrath of Allah. Allah says, you were watching, and Allah, with one thunderbolt, one explosion, Allah took all of you and gave you death. ثُمَّ بَعَثْنَاكُم مِّن بَعْدِ مَوْتِكُم. Then raised you from death again. Hey, did you learn your lesson? Now Allah could have given them death through Pharaoh and they were allowed to watch, but now they messed with Allah and He gave them death and then brought them back to life and then says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. Hopefully this time you'll be grateful. And so from then on, okay, now we learned our lesson. وَلَّلْنَا عَلَيْكُمُ الْغَمَامِ. Now they're in the desert. They're supposed to die of dehydration. There are men, women, children, babies, feeding mothers. If they don't have water, if they don't have relief from the blazing sun in the desert, they're gonna die. Allah sends a cloud that followed them like a portable umbrella, without just going everywhere with them. And of course, it's giving rain and giving relief to them also, right? It's keeping them cool while they have no homes to go to. ظَلَّلْنَا عَلَيْكُمُ الْغَمَامِ وَأَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَنَّ وَالسَّلْوَى. Manna and salwa, without going into too much detail, very simply, it's their wheat or it's their carbohydrates and it's their proteins, right? It's meat from the bird. So essential nutrients, hydration, fats, proteins, carbs, all of them taken care of in one go. So the manna is the grain and nothing would grow in the desert, and yet because of the rain and this special grain that was coming, the man, and the birds that wouldn't fly off, they would just easily be caught so they can eat them, then cook them and eat them. This became a way for them to be sustained in the middle of impossible circumstances. Allah is also teaching us that just because you're the chosen nation and you're the Muslim nation doesn't mean that you're going to have the best food and the best economic circumstances and that you're going to have stable homes. You'll be out in the desert and your only relief will be a cloud. And the only food you have is manna and salwa. And Allah says, and this is one of my favors to you, right? So just because we're Muslim doesn't mean we have to be superpowers. Or we're always going to be in a state of great glory. We're going to have government and things like that. These were the people. Allah, He says, أَنِّي فَضَّلْتُكُمْ. I favored you. And if you saw them, if you had a camera back then, looking at these people in the desert, barely living in tents, the only water supply they have is the rain at the time, or these rocks that get water coming out of them for 12 tribes. The only food they have is one kind of grain and one kind of meat, and that's it. That's all they got. They got no salad, no ketchup, no salt, no pepper, no masala, nothing. And you would say, these poor people, these refugees, all these masakin, how terrible their life. And Allah is starting this passage with, I gave you a favor. Because it's a matter of perspective. A nation that was going to be killed, annihilated, they would have been wiped off the face of the earth. Their progeny would never have survived, are still in the middle of death being given a means to survive. In the middle of death. That's a favor from Allah too. So even what we consider terrible circumstances are actually an alternative to annihilation. They're an alternative to death. And Allah has given that to them. And He says, ظَلَّلْنَا عَلَيْكُمُ الْغَمَامِ وَأَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَنَّ وَالسَّلْوَىٰ. And how does He describe that? كُلُوا مِن طَيِّبَاتِ مَا رَزَقْنَاكُمْ. Eat from the good and pure things that we've provided you. Like, it's not the Michelin star, 5-star restaurant food. It's just manna and salwa, but it's provided by Allah to eat from the good and pure things. If whatever you have, consume it and be grateful and make the most of it. وَمَا ظَلَمُونَا وَلَكِنْ كَانُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ يَظْلِمُونَ. We didn't wrong them. They were doing wrong to themselves. Relief after relief after relief after relief. And one of the ways of being ungrateful to the favor of Allah is, here Allah is giving you relief, and you're like, but that's not the order I placed. I had a different kind of relief in mind. I don't like your version of relief. I want my own version of relief. I want the relief to work on my preferences. Allah is giving us this perspective in these ayat. Things could have been so much worse. Look at where you were with the Pharaoh. Look at what you have now. And the last thing I'll share with you, not as an individual, but as a nation. As a nation, being free and having independence is far bigger a relief than, living in luxury or living in comfort. If they stayed in Egypt, they'd be killed. Or if they'd remain slaves. Now they're eating one kind of food, but they have freedom. And they've run away from the enemy. They're living in the desert, but they have self-determination. They have self-determination. And that's one of the most powerful, getting away from an oppressor and having some opportunity to start your life over again. That is one of the most powerful gifts Allah has given nations. Entire nations have survived migrating, getting away from oppression and being able to start anew. And entire new societies emerge as a reason. There's a rahmah of Allah then when some Sahaba went to Habasha. It was a rahmah of Allah. It was a rahmah of Allah when the Muslims migrated to Medina. It was a rahmah of Allah. He opened a door for them to escape. And the same thing happens here. He opens a door for them to escape. And this is the relief of nations that sometimes Allah gives. Now one would say, no, but they were in Egypt. What a better solution would have been just kill Fir'aun right in Egypt and they can move into the palace. Right? So instead of today, the pyramids being a tourist site, where the ancient kings used to live, the Israelites would have made that into their homes and they would have settled there. Now that's on your terms, buddy. That's not on the terms that Allah decides history. He has a different plan for history, and nations move and migrate in history, right? And so even in those difficult circumstances, there's a favor from Allah. And by the way, that same nation that was eating in the desert and sleeping on the sand, right? A few generations later, Allah gives them Dawood and Sulaiman. Just a few generations later, and they ruled much of the known world. Much of the known world. And some of the power figures in the Quran, are Dhul Qarnayn and Sulaiman alayhi salam. And also Dawood alayhi salam. And 2 out of the 3 at least are Israelite prophets. Subhanallah. This is the way of Allah giving relief. So let's understand and feel this favor of Allah upon nations in the recitation of Shaykh Bakir as he recites these ayat of Bani Israel for us.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإذ نجيناكم من آل فرعون يسومونكم سوء العذاب يذبحون أبناءكم ويستحيون نساءكم وفي ذلكم بلاء من ربكم عظيم وإذ فرقنا بكم البحر فأنجيناكم وأغرقنا آل فرعون وأنتم تنظرون وإذ واعدنا موسى 40 ليلة ثم اتخذتم العجل من بعده وأنتم ظالمون ثم عفونا عنكم من بعد ذلك لعلكم تشكرون وإذ آتينا موسى الكتاب والفرقان لعلكم تهتدون وإذ قال موسى لقومه يا قوم إنكم ظلمتم أنفسكم باتخاذكم العجل فتوبوا إلى باريكم فاقتلوا أنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم عند باريكم فتاب عليكم إنه هو التواب الرحيم وإذ قلتم يا موسى لن نؤمن لك حتى نرى الله جهرا وإذ قلتم يا موسى لن نؤمن لك حتى نرى الله جهرا فأخذتكم الصاعقة وأنتم تنظرون ثم بعثناكم من بعد موتكم لعلكم تشكرون وظللنا عليكم الغمام وأنزلنا عليكم المن والسلوى كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم وما ظلمونا ولكن كانوا أنفسهم يظلمون صدق الله العظيم.
Allah protect you, Ibraheem. Ameen. You just leave me speechless sometimes. Allah give you the khair for making us feel the ayat of the Quran in a way that just leaves us, it's just indescribable. Jazakumullahu khairan everyone. We'll see you next episode. Assalamu alaikum.